What's the most annoying thing your boss has ever done to you? So one time my former boss asked me to print a document for him. I clicked print and he rolled his eyes and sighed and said, "Wow. For a Mac user, you sure don't use very many keyboard shortcuts." Then he made me cancel the print, which resulted in throwing the half-printed document into the garbage. Got up out of my chair and let him use my computer. He then hit Command P, gave me a smug look and said, "See?" He wasn't even a fresh out of uni schmuck. He was in his 50s. He also used to call me little girl and once mocked my language abilities because I pronounced a French surname slightly incorrectly when I had never heard it before. I speak French as a second language, so hence the mispronunciation, and he very admittedly did not. I could write a book on how annoying that man was, but filling myself full of sand would be less irritating. Dang, I already hate that guy after hearing this story, and I've never even met him. I don't want to. Story 2. When my first child was born, she was diagnosed as failure to thrive. This is a case where they're not gaining weight and generally not taking enough nutrients, and if not addressed, could result in infant passing. We'd been concerned about her food intake, so my wife took her to the doctor while I was at work, and the doctor immediately sent them to the hospital where my daughter was admitted. When my wife called and told me what was going on, I was obviously a complete wreck. In tears, I went to my boss and told him that I had to leave right away, explaining what was going on. The boss let me go. Frankly, I was leaving no matter what he would have said, but beforehand decided that that very moment was an appropriate time to lecture me on how unprofessional I was being by showing so much attention in the office. Apparently, even having your infant child on departure's doorstep was not a good reason to show emotion in the workplace. Story 3. Happened a couple months ago. He asked me to fly to a different city for a meeting where I would meet him, also flying in, and another manager. We planned it out weeks in advance. He said he would fly in earlier and rent a car. I confirmed details with him twice, including the day before the trip. When I got there, I texted him, "I'm here, where can we meet?" He called shortly after, asking me to rent a car myself. Okay, I asked if I should pick him up. He says no. Then he said he wouldn't be making it today. Okay. I guess something important came up and we can do the meeting over the phone. Time comes for the meeting. I'm sitting with the other manager in her office. We call my boss, no answer. It was his meeting. So not much to do without him. We wait, then try again, and again something really important must have happened. I hope he's alright. I found out the details later. My boss forgot to make travel plans or buy an airplane ticket. Even with the confirmations I sent him that he responded to, when it came time to at least call us for the meeting, he forgot about that too. Story 4. I used to be the lone sysadmin for a small company that manufactured corrugated boxes. I was working particularly early one morning, around 5 a.m., just as shifts were about to start to ensure that our mail servers were correctly transferred over from our in-house mail server to a hosted exchange. To say the least, I was swamped. I get a call from the owner of the company, an incompetent 50-something with a Harvard degree. He tries to save every penny he can, asking me to drive to his house and clean his boat after having a party the previous night. I politely told him that was the stupidest thing he has ever asked me to do for him, especially given the situation. I was mad the rest of the week and ignored every phone call from him thereafter. About 3 weeks after that, I quit and I found a better job without the stress of a terrible owner. Story 5. A customer dropped a couple 2-liter bottles on my ankle while it was sprained, twisted, generally hurt. Kinda forgot exactly what happened to it, except I know it happened in a bike accident. My leg was at a weird angle because I had to have it wrapped super tight and couldn't put any weight on it or it would hurt like hell. And that cracked one of the bones in there. My boss makes me walk back to his office and gives me a long talk about how workers' compensation works while I'm delirious from pain. He then tells me that I have 2 options: sign a piece of paper that says I won't sue for workers' comp and leave for the hospital immediately, or get workers' comp but not be able to leave work until the HR lady got off of work and could drive me over. I would also need to take a substance test before anyone could look at my leg. Being a dumb 19-year-old, I signed that paper and practically crawled to the door where I could call a friend to bring me to the hospital, with my ankle swollen to the size of a grapefruit. What I'm basically trying to say here is that you shouldn't work for Walmart. Story 6. My boss continuously does all sorts of crappy things to me, but one particularly hit me hard. I'm working on a paper that we're submitting to science once it's finished. Well, I've done all the work, but my boss gave me first authorship to a postdoc who's done very little to contribute. I can't do anything about it because lab politics usually involve the PhD student being at the bottom of the food chain. When I tried to reason with him about it, he started making crybaby noises and asked if I needed a pacifier. Story 7. Talking to me like I'm stupid, knowing enough to know I'm smarter than most people around me, but choosing to opt out of office politics didn't go so well. I made the mistake of showing up to work to do work, not to make friends, which results in each mistake I make being with a speech surely designed for a mentally challenged third grader. Knowing that superior work was being met with extra and unnecessary criticism because I didn't go drinking with the team after work got to me more than it should have. Story 8. My boss screws me over at least monthly. As a grad student, my boss is judge, jury, and executioner. I utterly depend on him for recommendation letters that determine my entire career, and he can end my entire life's ambition with a single sentence to my committee, even though I have published original work. This gives him an incredible amount of leverage to do whatever he wants to me. His favorite tactic is the nasty email, usually sent at 10 p.m. or so. He will act friendly during the day and randomly send them when he feels like it with no warning. They generally include something along the lines of how I haven't done anything in 10 months, even though I have had nearly 2 papers in that time period, or how I, quote, left at 5 p.m. the other day. About 50% of the time, he will send a nasty email if I use vacation time, even if I have tons of it left. No matter how much work I put out, his attitude does not change. He comes in 7 days a week and expects everyone to work at least 6, no matter what is going on, just because he doesn't give a care about anything else and expects us to be the same way. He will randomly cancel meetings he has set up, but seldom reschedules if I need to. He has told me that I need to start coming back in after dinner, even though I am often the first person in the morning. I basically have to bow to his every demand because, again, he holds sole authority over my career and there isn't a thing I cannot do about it. No job would be worth this, but because this has a degree at the end of it, I have to put up with whatever happens. The thing that sickens me is we work our butts off for him. He wouldn't have any chance of getting tenure without the papers we put out, and he gets rewarded for this behavior. Story 9. I worked as a contract negotiator for the DOJ in the early 90s. One of the problems that plagued our department for years was that we did not have any consistency in our contract language. This was pre-software tools, so each person had to craft their own contracts from scratch and often omitted important legal terms. Our contracts were reviewed by the General Counsel's office, and we were put on their version of double secret probation for a serious error rate that exceeded 50%, i.e. more than half of our contracts were missing critical elements. On my own initiative, I came up with a series of tools to address this issue. I developed new contract templates with associated guidance on their use, how to customize them for unique circumstances, developed a contract review process that systematically reviewed all critical terms, and even wrote a simple program with canned language to provide consistent feedback to the contract authors. My bosses were enthused. I managed the rollout, trained all staff, and took feedback to address my mistakes. The contract error rate dropped from greater than 50% to less than 3% within 6 months. Our department was given a special commendation as we now had the best quality agreements in the DOJ. During my annual review that year, I was given the equivalent of a fully successful rating. My bosses told me that my performance was outstanding across the board and that they advocated for an outstanding performance review. But senior management declined because I had received an outstanding in the prior year and they couldn't give it out to the same person 2 years in a row. Instead, the outstanding review went to a person that used my tools to review our contracts as she had, quote, made a major contribution to the success of our department. Please understand that these tools were fairly simple to use. A first-year employee could have used them effectively. Oh, and she was also given a promotion to management as a direct result of her outstanding performance. I left the federal government later that year and have worked in the private sector ever since. I strongly dislike those guys. Story 10. A shift manager at a fast food place. Normal shift is supposed to have 6 to 7 people working, plus a shift manager. We had 2, plus the shift manager and the store manager, so 4 people trying to do the work of twice that many on a Friday night, aka the busiest night of the week. So I am busting my butt trying to get stuff done. Unsurprisingly, we are falling behind. It's taken forever to get orders filled. We have customers piling up and people were getting mad. There was absolutely nothing we could do. We were working flat out. The store managers calling anybody and everybody, trying to get people to show up to help us out. No one's coming. The shift manager decides now is the time to start riding my butt about my job performance. I'm not moving fast enough. I'm not following correct procedure. I'm not doing this or that and so on and so forth. Just petty complaints. Now, mind you, I'm doing the work of 2, maybe 3 people at this point. Register, grill, fry station, even jobs I haven't exactly been trained on yet. I am getting stuff done, but of course I'm not keeping up with demand. And with customers yelling at me on one end and a tin god shift manager yelling at me at the other, I'm just losing my cool. At about this point, I come to the realization I am making minimum wage. I am quite literally not being paid enough to take this nonsense. I calmly turn to the store manager and say, "Okay, please tell the shift manager to shut up or I'm going home. I'm working as hard and as fast as I can and I don't need her yelling at me right now." At this point, the shift manager just loses it, starts screaming at me. I don't know all that was said. At this point, I just don't care. I take off my apron and hand it to the store manager. "I'm sorry to do this to you, but I can't handle this. Fire me if you have to, but I'm going home." And I clock out and leave. I felt bad for the other worker I left in the middle of that mess, but I was quite literally at the end of my patience. If I'd stuck around, I would have completely lost my temper and probably taken a swing at the shift manager. No idea how that situation was handled for the rest of the night. They had 3 or 4 hours to go until they closed, plus closing stuff to do, which normally takes a crew of 4 an hour or so. I fully expected to get a call the next day saying I had been fired, but I didn't. The next shift I worked, I did get called into the store manager's office and had it explained that what I did, while understandable, had not been appropriate. The shift manager was later promoted to assistant manager and transferred to another store, and as I understand it, fired shortly thereafter. Story 11. Not my current job, but an internship I had while I was in college. I was running Q&A for a graduate school's website. My boss came in one day and handed me a magazine listing out the school's full course listings. My task was to go through the entire magazine and use that to compare against the online listings to ensure they were accurate. We had just relaunched the school's website. I had spent at least a full day doing this when my boss comes furiously into my cubicle demanding why the numbers were wrong for the first section of courses I had already inspected. I got confused and had her clarify which courses she was talking about. Perhaps she had accidentally seen a section I hadn't reached. Sure enough, it was a portion that I had done and had updated to match the magazine. She asked me why I was using the magazine. Those numbers were not accurate. I reminded her that she had told me to use the magazine. She agreed. I asked her what numbers should I check against if not the magazine since I had no other sources to use. She said to make sure the numbers were accurate and to keep working. This happened several more times over the next 2 weeks. Good times. Story 12. I worked for a Hollywood manager. He was divorced, but still pretty sharp looking. He would go out to clubs and events, find the hottest, youngest girl there, and talk her up. By the end of the evening, he would have told her about some movie she was perfect for, and wasn't she lucky he was creating the production and cast package. He'd give her his card and seal the deal. They go home, he'd fool around and leaves. Then there's me, his assistant, stuck answering the phone when these poor schmoozed girls called the next day, asking to speak to him about the part. I would have to take a message and make excuses. It happened literally every day. Some girls never called back, but boy, did others get crazy. Calling multiple times a day. "No, you don't understand. He promised." I got cursed out, threatened, pleaded with, and bribe offers, but they mostly cried. 2 even came in person to try and talk to him. It was the worst experience I've ever gone through at a job. Story 14. Yesterday, my boss asked me to include certain market information in a report and told me how easy this information is to find online. "I'd show you where to find it, but I don't have the time," she tells me. After searching on our intranet for an entire day, I called the head of market research, a 50,000 person company, who proceeded to laugh and tell me that no one tracks that statistic. Story 14. My supervisor, who I live with on a holiday camp, watched me reading the Battle Royale for a couple of weeks. Just as I got to about 50 pages from the end, the book's about 800 pages long, she said, "Oh, that's the book where," and told me the ending. The manager of a pub I worked at during university let his friend sack me for a laugh during a lock-in. The deputy manager of a pub in London took over from the manager whilst they looked for a new one. She changed my shifts from 45 hours a week to 1 weekend night, which I normally didn't work due to living on the other side of London and the night bus taking 3 hours. She said, "Well, if you're only working once a week, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get home, does it?" Story 15. I had to fill out my time card in triplicate to get paid. On one, I had to subdivide my hours that week on a daily basis depending on which project I was working on. Each project has its own independent code name. On the second, I had to note which department I was working for every day and how many hours. Each department has its own department number. The third one was for the billing department that contracts out temp employees to an agency to actually figure out how many hours I worked for the company that week so they could pay me. All three required logging in and out of 3 different systems to track our hours. Story 16. Not just me, the entire state. I work in a sales environment as a senior trainer. My job is to make sure that everyone gets the skills that they need to make as much money as possible while maintaining high metrics. Our employees get tracked on every little thing. Not my boss per se, but a higher manager that I support stole a great idea from another area on how to improve our accessory sales. I immediately jumped all over it as that is a huge focus for our business and an excellent way for our reps to make more money. He refused to let me see the training deck for it, saying that it was only for use in his zone of stores. And if it showed success, then he would send it out to the area as his idea to try to get an additional promotion. He is hurting the entire state by holding back his stolen idea, and more than likely will allow reps all over to get fired for underperforming in this metric. I should mention that I wasn't looking for any sort of credit for this. I just want to get the knowledge out to everyone so we, as a team, could be stronger. Story 17. I was made to clean a staircase with a toothbrush. I might have deserved it, but it was annoying anyway. I used to work in a lighting rental workshop. We rented out lighting and stage equipment to local theaters, high schools, churches, venues, etc. My boss at the time had previously been a set carpenter, but due to an unfortunate accident, had lopped off 2 of the fingers on one of his hands. This was years earlier, so he had 8 fingers when I met him and it wasn't a big deal. One tool we used often was a heat gun. It's basically a hair dryer on steroids. One day we got a new heat gun, which was a big deal because the one we had was old as dirt. The previous day, I somehow managed to completely destroy a light fixture amidst the simple task of changing a light bulb. So my 8-fingered boss is showing us the new heat gun, looks at me specifically and says, "Now you be careful with this thing." I responded, "Listen, I don't know why you're getting all up in my case about this. I still have all 10 of my fingers." So he made me clean a staircase with a toothbrush. That's what I get. Alright, if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 18. Today, right now, is my last day of student teaching. I'm sitting here livid right now during my plan period. My cooperating teacher, sort of my boss, I guess, sorry, I gotta get this off of my chest, is an awful teacher. It's been all year. Her general attitude towards me is that I'm scum and I don't know anything. Trying to ask her for help leads me into an avalanche of, "Well, you should know about this, talk about this, why haven't you covered this, blah, 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 blah." I'm sorry, I'm a history teacher and don't feel like students want to watch your boring PowerPoint presentations for the entire hour. I'm sorry if I want to give them fun activities to do in class rather than take notes, and more notes. I'm sorry I want to focus them on making sure they know the key information rather than some random nonsense that they don't honestly need to know. But no, I'm the awful one. Today is my last day. I haven't taught for the last week and have been observing other history teachers. Any other teacher in this building would have been better to learn from. Today, she asked if I could cover the last 3 hours because she has to go help coach, which is fine. On our final goodbye, she said, "Well, if you would have taught like you did and had years of teaching background, you would have been an awful teacher. But because you haven't had that experience, you did all right. You could be a good teacher someday if you get more experience." Story 19. Hard to pick a main one, moving my desk out of my office into a communal area while I was out of the country on business, borrowing my company car while I was out of the country and took it motor racing. Decided my office was too messy, so while I was away again, sold some of my personal possessions found in the office on eBay. Sent our secretary out with a verbal message to be delivered mid-conversation with colleagues. He says to shut up, you're making him mad. Telling customers and suppliers loudly, "Don't talk to Shuck, he's very busy." If it looked like they were going to speak with me. Quite often before or after shared a coffee between himself and them. I have more, but those are the highlights I can think of right now. Story 20. I got told off for not being enthusiastic enough. We were getting sent outside in terrible weather, 60-mile-per-hour gusts, torrential rain, and minus temperatures in November to do soil sampling that could be done at any time of the year and in better weather conditions. I got a dressing down for 20 minutes, which made us late to arrive on site. Who the heck is going to be enthusiastic about going out in that, especially when your boss says, "You should be happy to be doing this job"? Story 21. My boss at my last job was a lunatic, seriously, certifiably insane. He once texted me at about 2 a.m. asking me if I knew who tried to break into my office because the door looked like it had been jimmied. I told him the door had always looked that way, but he insisted somebody had tried to break in and threatened that when he found out who it was, they would be fired. Another time on a car ride to an auto auction, I worked at a used car dealership, he lectured me for an hour and a half on the male mentality, insisting that if my boyfriend started checking my mom out, he was a keeper, and it wasn't a real relationship until you could take a dump in front of your significant other. My career there ended when he fired me via text message just as I was sitting down to a nice Thanksgiving meal with my family on Thanksgiving Day. His reason? defamation of himself and the company using a business computer for said defaming conversations. He failed to realize that his access to these conversations with my boyfriend over GChat also meant he legally signed on to my personal Gmail account and illegally printed out personal emails. I could go on, but I filed for unemployment and will be talking to a lawyer very soon. Story 22. Pretending to like me. I had an old boss who ran a gym and I sat at the front desk. I did her paperwork, made sure her website all looked good, ran all her social network stuff, handled her email list, fended off the customers she angered, helped her rewire the place, clean the gym every morning, oversaw a massive software shift in the stuff we use to process clients, did 2 months of data entry by hand, troubleshoot with tech support while keeping her occupied elsewhere because she liked to mouth off to tech support. The entire time she praised me for my work, and so I did it all with a smile. I had to leave for school and she was sad to see me go, begged me to stay and handle her stuff. 2 weeks after leaving, I emailed her and asked if she still has a shift or two open, since it looks like my school schedule is going to be different than expected. Now, mind you, this woman would regularly take weeks to check her emails for me, so it wasn't that far out in her time from when I left. She said she didn't have shifts, but I should stop by for my last check anyway. And then she proceeded to show me the new system she'd installed, the system I'd installed over the course of the last 4 months. You would think she was lying, angry that I'd left, but that woman was transparent. You could see when she was trying to fool you. She legitimately forgot that I had done that for her and had remembered it as her doing the work. She was convinced she'd implemented it after I'd left. Story 23. My boss once intoxicatedly called me at 12 a.m. on a night where I was due to open the store the next day, saying I had to pick him up from a place 30 minutes out of town as he was staying with friends. I'd never done this before, but I said fine. So I wake up an hour earlier than I normally would have to drive to the middle of nowhere to pick him up. I call him to say I had arrived, but I got no reply. Called him again and he answered, but just mumbled that he was at the house and hung up. Not knowing what he meant, I called him again, but he turned his phone off. So I wait for another 20 minutes until I give up and go to the store. He turns up 10 minutes late, clearly hungover, and he gives me no apology whatsoever. Story 24. Oh wow, let's see. I'm in the military and had a horrible section leader for about 3 years. We are actually pretty good friends now that he retired and I left the unit, but here goes. He would constantly make me stay after work to give him rides home. He was 4 pay grades higher than I was and more than able to buy a car. He would continuously ask to borrow my car, and when I finally gave in and let him borrow it, he didn't even pay me the agreed amount of money for borrowing and lending it to him. When borrowing my car, he got a parking ticket, never offered to pay it, and never told me about it. So a few months later, I got a letter in the mail for an overdue parking ticket that added up to like €30. He would accept bribes from other sections. We were IT support to do our job. They would give him cases of Red Bull to get their printers set up quickly, just an example, and then make one of the soldiers, usually me, do it and keep the Red Bull. He would constantly degrade us, call the overweight soldiers names like chubby, and just yell at us constantly for honest mistakes. He had anger management issues. I saw paperwork for it on his desk one day. When we got to Afghanistan, I let him borrow my hard drives to copy all of my movies. Well, later on in the deployment, one of my hard drives wiped, so I asked if he could copy all the movies back onto it. He said no, unless I gave him $30. I got a laptop as a gift in the mail during deployment, and he wanted it for his daughter because it was a neat little netbook, so he constantly pressured me to sell it to him for way less than it was worth new, and it was still in the box. When I said no, he said he would remember this and all sorts of other threatening things. I finally agreed to trade for an unlocked iPhone and some money, but I didn't really want to. I just wanted to keep the working relationship the best I could because he could make my life a living hell, even more than it already was. I know there were a lot of things I could do to get him in trouble because sergeants aren't supposed to do things like this because they are unlawful orders or unethical, but when the command really likes him, there isn't much I could do. If I would have said something and he managed to not get in trouble for it, he would make my life even worse. That was a horrible 3 years of my life. You can't quit when you're in the military. You're stuck working with whoever is in the unit that you get assigned to. Story 25. I was the Q&A manager at a major food company. We're talking millions of pounds of steak per year. I wasn't a middle manager by any means. My boss had this thing about working Saturdays. He was given his job because he had gone to college with the owner's son, who was, by the time I worked there, a full partner in the company with directorial duties. My boss and the owner's son definitely had the beta alpha thing going on. The owner's son was tall, had a beautiful wife, charismatic, rich, and was generally the kind of guy you think of when you think of guys who run multi-million-dollar companies. My boss was a slow-witted, paunchy bore with an ugly wife, low-quality car, and a major inferiority complex. So my boss had this bulldog thing going on. He wanted to look like the hardest worker, the guy who always was on the spot. He never gave me important projects, he did them all himself. And for that reason, he was way overworked and would come in and work Saturdays even when nobody else was working. This was on top of the usual 50 hours we worked Monday through Friday. So one Friday, he tells me he needs me to come in Saturday to help him with a project. I ask him, what project? He says we need to make copies of the 8 binders full of label approval documents so we can have an extra one on hand for USDA inspectors. I ask, so you're asking me to come in on Saturday to make photocopies? He launches into his usual speech about, this is what the job is, I told you there would be Saturday work. I tell him, I'm already here 50 hours a week. If you don't think I have time to make a bunch of copies in 50 hours, then you've severely underestimated me. I did not come in and work that Saturday. I quit a few months later. That guy was an unwise person. There was an earlier weekend when we actually did have full production on Saturday and we all had to come in and work. My boss was already there at 6 when I got there. He says, I have to leave at 10 to go to my son's baseball game, but I'll be back after. This was before I hated him, so I say, I can handle things here, you don't have to come back, have fun at the game. That man was back at work by noon. Story 26. Managed to have 4 days off in a row because I requested the weekend off for my boyfriend's birthday, which was a Saturday. His parents got us a condo for the night. My boss calls me and asks if we can switch shifts on Monday. I was scheduled to work at 6 a.m. and she at 2 p.m., so I say sure, because it meant we could stay an extra night on the beach Sunday. Later on, she calls and says, never mind, bummer. So we go home Sunday afternoon, and Monday I wake up at 4 a.m. and shuffle into work. I'm confused because the door is already open, but I should be the only one with the key there. I go in and the boss is there. I say, what the heck? I thought we didn't switch. She says, we didn't. You are scheduled to close. I reply, since when? She says, since Thursday when I changed the schedule. Oh, you mean the day I started 4 days off of work and no one bothered to call and tell me my schedule for the week was completely different? Oh, okay. Unreasonable person. Story 27. My boss hired me as a developer to finish a software project that was 6 months overdue the day I was hired. He would scream and yell at me because he knew I couldn't quit. My wife was expecting a baby in 2 months and I couldn't afford the Cobra payments if I left. One day I was working in my cube and the boss marched in to tell me that the chief client for this project was very unhappy with the lack of progress, and both the client and my boss's boss were waiting to talk with us in a conference room 1 floor below. My boss, whose wife was also expecting a baby, was screaming me out on the walk down the stairwell. If he tells me anything that this is your fault, I'm marching your backside down to HR and getting rid of you this afternoon. Then we walked into the conference room to find a surprise baby shower for both of our wives. He was still furious for a good solid 10 minutes after everyone yelled, surprise! He quit about a year later. Miserable guy. Story 28. I'm pretty lucky compared to some people here, but my bosses, yes, multiple, they all try to run the store and never consult each other. Major communication breakdowns everywhere. Loose paperwork from employees all the time. They claim they never got them. So they lost my direct deposit request, and I'm too lazy to get the paperwork filled out again. They always lose vacation and day off notifications and requests. Minor annoyance when it's one day, since I can get away with calling off semi-frequently, which I'm lucky to do. I know most employees in other places are so lucky. Or I can find someone to cover one shift with relative ease. But when you've booked a vacation 5 months in advance, bought plane tickets, reserved a hotel, and suddenly the schedule for that week comes out and you find you're still scheduled to work, it's a huge hassle getting it changed and they'll argue with you about it. Do I have proof I submitted a time off request? Well, no, because it was 5 months ago and I put it in the inbox. They start demanding the head manager to be the only one to approve time off requests or schedule changes. But if you work afternoons or evenings, you never see her. So I would leave a note asking her to fix it. Next time I saw her, you can't just demand that I fix your schedule. It's rude. I didn't demand, I asked, and I put a smiley face next to it. Communication breakdown has gone so bad that you can now claim you told somebody when you didn't really. It's actually kind of nice. Story 29. Not so much my boss, but the supervisor I had working in Dublin a few years back had a reputation for bullying employees. Luckily for me, I was one of those employees. It was horrible, constantly being undermined and being given 3 weeks worth of work to do in 1 week. And when it wasn't done in time, he'd go crazy. It got so bad one day that I told him to leave and walked out on the job. The boss and the owner of the company called me back in for a meeting to see what had happened, and they explained to me that he was always a difficult person. But in the end, I told them that I didn't want the job if it meant I was to be working with the unpleasant supervisor, so I left. Story 30. I was working as a lab tech in upstate New York for a small company with a really overbearing Indian man who owned the company and micromanaged the absolute hell out of the place. One winter day, we got the annual large amount of snow, 30 plus inches overnight. And since I walked to work every day, I still made it into work, and the only other person there was my boss. He slept there the night before. He then proceeds to spend the entire day following me around, yelling at me for every problem in the building, especially the ones that are not only not my responsibility, but that I have no way to fix: programming, sales, answering the telephones, etc. Eventually, by around 3 p.m., he comes into the lab and starts accusing me of deleting data that existed before I began working for him since he couldn't find it. This was important because he was expecting me to repeat the findings on the machine he had developed but had never worked. He always said that it had worked before I started working there, but there was nothing to support his claim. The accusations of tampering with data was the last straw for that day. I snapped and we both shouted at each other for about 10 minutes. I told him I needed to go home and I would see him tomorrow. Needless to say, we hated each other from then on, and I left for greener pastures 2 months later. Story 31. I quit a job and gave 2 weeks' notice when I got an offer for $2 an hour more plus benefits. My chef called me the day after my last day and screamed at me on the phone for almost an hour. Apparently, I'm a nasty person and he wouldn't assist me if I was on fire. I even put the phone down and went and got ready for work and came back and he was still ranting. He called later and threatened to sue me for destruction of property, vandalism, and theft because I sat on a broken chair outside on the deck of the kitchen. And it shattered. It was a plastic lawn chair, and the arms and back had broken off of it before I sat on it. The owner also called my new boss and told him that I called off all the time and had been fired 3 times in the past year. None of that was true. I'd never called off in 2.5 years, never been fired, and was doing 2 different jobs all by myself. Story 32. He likes to assign random, unimportant jobs while whining that I'm not doing anything when I'm clearly working on something, or worse, helping a customer. He once complained at my coworkers and me for putting our jackets on a few boxes closer to the work area instead of way back in the kitchen because he hates clutter. The next day, we come to work only to see he has put his stuff in the exact same boxes. When I'm doing a job or about to do a job, he would pull a Captain Obvious and tell me to do the job, then complain like I'm a lazy piece of garbage and proudly act like I wouldn't have done the job unless he told me to. At a different job, I had a manager schedule me off 3 days in a row for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I come in on Thursday, and he had me written up for not showing up for a Wednesday shift that he penciled me in for after I left for my 3 days off, and which he didn't call to tell me about. Story 33. I worked at a motorcycle dealership. Even though it was pouring rain all day, I still had to go out to the lot to get the crates so I could build the bikes. At the end of the day, I was soaked beyond compare and very tired. I was filling out my last PDI, pre-delivery inspection sheet for the day before it was time to leave when the general manager sees me biting my nails, trying to remember when I took it out of the crate, and says, "Have you done anything today, or are you just trying to get paid to sit around?" Also, on the note of rain, a thunderstorm happened while I was loading a few ATVs onto the flatbed trailer to deliver, and the GM gathers the crew to watch from the window. He was an awesome dude. Story 34. I work in retail. One time my boss was talking to an elderly couple who were frequent shoppers and spent a lot of money. While talking to them, the lady stepped in some fresh gum on the floor and it was stuck pretty nicely on the bottom of her shoe. As this happens, I walk by and he asks me to take care of this. I'm like, what? So he tells me to get some tools from the back and some freeze dry and take the gum off the lady's shoe for her. So instead of selling stuff and doing my job, I'm standing in the middle of the store wrestling with a smelly shoe and jabbing a screwdriver in the gum trying to get it off. Most humiliating thing I've had to do. Story 35. She tells me how to number the network jacks in the floor for the classroom in the wrong order. I tell her it's wrong. She makes me do it for her anyway. Weeks later, she finds out it was wrong and has me redo it without remorse or acknowledgement. We then repeated this process on another classroom. Then there was a time I was out for 2 days for vacation. When I came back, I find out she had formatted my computer. Because we were doing inventory, was the explanation. I had just completed the list of property ID numbers on the 100-some-odd computers in the whole building. The only copy was on the now formatted computer. She told me to do it again without even saying sorry or admitting she had made a mistake in the least. This is the same woman that absolutely insisted to the point of yelling that I wash a keyboard in a sink. She then acted all surprised when it didn't work anymore. She was not very bright. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.